tuning in to another episode of Teen Gen Talks, the podcast, where the goal is to empower the youth of Glendale and connect youth to community resources, individuals, and organizations through interviews and discussions. I'm your host, Desiree, and I had the pleasure of talking to Deeba Zargarpur. Deeba is an Afghan Uzbek American. She credits her love of literature across various languages to her immigrant parents, whose eerie tales haunted her well into the night. If given the chance, she would spend her days getting lost in spooky towns with nothing but a notebook and an eye for an adventure to guide her. Her debut YA novel is called House of Yesterday, and her debut MG novel, Farrah Noorzad and the Ring of Fate, will be released in 2024. I hope you enjoy the interview. So thank you, Deeba, for taking the time out of your day to sit down and talk. We have a lot to discuss.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited.
So to start off the interview, I want to talk about your journey as a book editor. What gravitated you towards this avenue?
So it's interesting how I got into book editing. I like to say my journey has been very non-traditional. I feel like the expected answer is I love reading. I always like books. I love stories, which is true. As a young person, I really loved reading. Not books, but I really enjoyed manga and graphic novels and comics, which is reading, in my opinion. But that's what I was really gravitated towards. And I didn't know as a young person that there was a team behind the product or the book. I just knew that it was something that you had in my hands that I read, and I didn't know until much later that there was a whole industry dedicated to producing these books. And it wasn't until after I graduated university that I realized maybe this is something that I wanted to do.
And during your time working as an editor, you also work on several books. How did you find that balance, to do both?
It was very hard. It is still very hard as I'm still doing it. And if there's anyone who is considering wanting to do both, to be a writer and an editor, the biggest tip I would give you is organization. You need to be able to organize your time, especially when it comes to deadlines and scheduling. In publishing, when you sell a book, you have a deadline for when your book needs to be done. And it's called being put into copy edits. So what that means is you finished revising your book with your editor and it's off to copy edits to the more production part of the book. So making it look like a book. And those dates are very firm and you can't miss them. If you miss them, you might experience some delays in your publication schedule. But it was hard for me to balance both because on the one hand, as an editor, my list is very large. So I manage over 40 books, my list alone. And then I write my own books, which is not nearly as much, thank God. But it was really difficult to balance them. And organization is really the only way that got me through it. Organization for all the deadlines. So just knowing when things are due and scheduling yourself every day to make sure that you hit those deadlines was extremely a lifesaver.
And then how then has being an editor shaped you or helped you in writing for your own books? I mean, you talked about organization, so maybe organization is one of them, but are there any other things that editing kind of has helped you with your writing?
It has helped me with my craft. So before I got into editing, I was a writer. I was a writer originally. I always wanted to write. I loved writing stories ever since I was a kid. And I am one of those people that doesn't plan, which is funny because I am an editor. But at the time in my previous life, I just wrote with no plan. I had a character and I just started writing a story and there was no structure. It was just whatever I felt like I wanted to write, which when you write the end, then you realize you have a huge mess and then you have to revise and revise and revise to figure out what that story is. Being an editor actually helped me a lot with craft and a lot with structure and a lot with plotting, thinking about the story ahead of time and helping yourself out a little bit with figuring out at least, the main like holds in a story. So now, I mean, I'm still an exploratory writer, but being an editor has helped me at least figure out what those benchmarks are in a story to help guide me as I write. So that's been the best learning lesson
Mm.
I've had.
Do you remember that moment when you decided to take that leap and that step to become an author and to put your voice out there for, the world to see something that you have created?
It was difficult for me to put myself out there as a writer. When I was younger and I was just writing for myself before I knew publishing was a thing. I never shared my writing with anyone. I was too
Mm,
shy. I felt like it was too personal. And it meant that I wasn't ready to be an author. I think that's something a lot of new writers have to consider is if you are uncomfortable with the idea of someone else reading your work, commenting on your
mm.
work, critiquing your work, taking the good with the bad, because not all books are for all people. You're not ready. If you can't handle that criticism yet, you're not ready to be an author yet. And for me, that took a lot of time. And it wasn't until I was around 25 years old that I was
Mm,
finally ready to have other people read my work and to consider publishing as an avenue to see if maybe my stories had some legs to be a real book. And so it took me a pretty long time to be okay with that. And since publishing, it's been also another journey that I went on because even when you are querying, even when you get an agent, even when you sell your book to a publisher, the book is still kind of yours. No one else is really reading it outside of you and your agent and your editor and maybe some friends. But then once the book publishes and everyone starts to read it, that took me some time to get used
mm.
to understand that people I don't know are reading my book and they have opinions and comments and they're totally valid. It's been post debut a good learning experience, like to let your story kind of go out into the world and be okay with that.
And your debut YA novel is called House of Yesterday. Can you talk a bit more about the book and the inspiration behind it?
Sure. So this is my debut. It is I like to call a gothic supernatural mystery that follows a mother-daughter duo into an abandoned home that they must renovate over the summer. But it is not abandoned at all. There is something watching them in the home. And over the course of the summer, my main character, 15-year-old Sarah, has to figure out exactly what it is the house wants from them
Mm,
before it's too late. As is normal in the genre, if you
mm.
like sentient house stories, if you like the past haunting the present, if you like ghosts, then this might be the book for you.
And your book tackles intergenerational family trauma, survivor's guilt, and the meaning of home. Did writing about these topics in a way was like a healing process for you as well? And then I guess how did you tackle on these topics?
Writing the book was really hard. I never thought that I would write something so personal
Mm.
as my first book or any book in general. I didn't think, number one, that there would be an audience for it. It's a very, very specific book in terms of who the characters are, the immigrants' families' lived experience. They are Afghan Uzbek. And growing up, not a lot of people even knew where Afghanistan was. And
Mm.
I feel like a lot of people don't even know where Uzbekistan was or is. um, so writing something so personal was not planned, but I feel like if you have something inside you, a story that you need to get out, it will eventually wiggle its way out. And I didn't realize as I was writing the story that there were some things that I needed to work through myself. Some of the struggles that I went through as a first gen American living in America with immigrant parents who escaped the war and kind of unraveling the things that come with that you don't even realize are affecting you, the struggles that your parents and grandparents had that then trickled down to you, and you being angry and not even knowing why.
Mm.
It was extremely therapeutic to write the story. And I think once I finished it, it kind of closed that chapter for me. As that young person, as that young teen, kind of ending the story kind of also put to rest a lot of things that I struggled with as a young person. And for that, I'm really, really grateful to have had that opportunity. And I think if you are a young person who is struggling with things, writing it out in a story is for me the safest place to do it because, it's your world and your
Mm.
exploration for the things that you can't put words to, and you're just trying to figure it out. It was a great experience for me. And I think if there's anyone out there who's like me, who finds therapy through words, definitely try it out.
And when it comes to your writing process, what does that look like? And does it change with each new book that you write?
It's chaotic. It's chaos. My writing process has no rhyme, no reason. I am an inspiration writer, and I know I told you
Mm,
before that organization is something that really helped me because of this reason. I am a writer that needs to feel inspired and
mm,
motivated to write, which doesn't make a very stable writing environment. So writing this book, I just wrote whenever I felt like I had to get the words out. And so
mm,
I generally like to carry something with me, like a notebook, or my laptop, and I'll just start writing. I started writing randomly, whenever. So it could have been in the middle of the night, it could have been really early, it could have been during lunch, because I knew myself if I didn't get the words in that moment, I wouldn't be able to do it later, which for my editor was not very good because that's very unstructured.
mm,
But with future books, what I've learned is kind of having to fight that natural instinct that I have and sort of learning to, be a little bit more structured, know that you can't really only rely on motivation or inspiration
mm.
because sometimes then you might never finish the project. So that's how my process has changed since then. Now I have to sit down, even if I don't feel inspired, because that's what I have to do.
And how did you choose the cover of House of Yesterday for the book?
The cover design was really interesting. It was a lot of fun. Basically, authors don't choose their covers. There's a whole design team at the publisher, and you usually get assigned like an art director, and then they talk with you about your vision for the cover, what's
Mm,
important for you. Is there a particular specification for the artist that you would want? So I had a really good conversation with my publisher about my ideas for the book, but I left it ultimately up to them. And they showed me a bunch of artists, and I was lucky because I was able to pick the artist that did
mm.
the cover. And then they just showed me different stages of the design process. So the sketches, and then the color, and then the final. And I got to have input on like the font for the
Mm.
cover or like some colors or like little things here or there. But it was a teamwork effort, and that's how the cover happened.
And when specifically teens pick up the book, what do you want them to take away from it, and how do you want them to feel?
I wrote this book as a means to escape. So I read to escape. I'm an escapist reader, writer, editor, and I think stories are kind of like that safe place to explore tough topics. It's like when it becomes too much, you can always close the book. And when you're ready for it, you can always pick it back up. And for readers who read this book, what I want them to take away from it is that, especially when things get tough and like sometimes your world changes in an instant. For example, in Sarah's story, her parents are getting divorced. Her grandmother has dementia. She had a falling out with her best friend, who she's kind of in love with. Her relationship with her cousins are not so great because she's going through all of this hard stuff, and it's cliche, but hurt people, and that's kind of where she
Mm.
is. And so it's a lot of change and it's a lot to handle. And I just want readers who go into the book know that it's okay to not be perfect when you're going through hard stuff. It's okay to be messy. It's okay to not say the right thing, to lash out, to hurt people, because at the end of the day, the important people in your life are always still going to be there for you. And you are still worthy of love, even when you're hurting, even when you're mean, even when you're not at your nicest, and that there is going to be a happy ending for you. So that's kind of what I would like readers to take away from.
He also founded Writers of Afghan Heritage. Can you talk a bit more about the initiative and how it came to be?
Yeah. So Writers of Afghan Heritage was an initiative that I started when I saw that there really weren't that many Afghan writers in traditional publishing. And I felt that growing up, I didn't have very many books to look up upon
Mm,
that featured people like me. Publishing had made steps to have more Afghan writers, but they were in the adult space, and a lot of that subject matter centers around war, and it just tells one specific story, which is important. But I found that only focusing on one specific story kind of narrows lived experiences and doesn't really paint a whole picture of a community, of a person, of a population. And I think that all people deserve the tough stories, but also the fun stories, the magical stories, the happy stories. So I wanted to create something that if you were someone who identified as being Afghan or had Afghan heritage, had someone to talk to kind of help you navigate how to write a story, how to get an agent, how to get published. I feel like a lot of people see a book and don't know the steps that it took to get that book in your hands. And I just wanted to eliminate at least one barrier for authors that were starting out. So that's what we do.
And the next couple of questions are from our local Glendale teens. The first question is, are there any other authors that you look up to?
So many authors. There are so many authors that I look up to. I don't know if I could name them all, but the first author that I had read that gave me even the idea that I could do something like this would be Khalid Hosseini. I feel like everyone knows his works. The Kite Runner, A Thousand Splendid Suns, The Mountains Echoed. Those books were obviously not for me as a high schooler, but I still read them because they were the only ones available where I saw an Afghan person writing and also writing about Afghanistan and just Afghan stories. And I read those books like overnight. It was just, even though they were tough, it was something. And it was the first time I had thought, well, maybe there could be room for me. And it inspired my not my love of writing, but just putting myself out there and just starting to write something. And then just growing up, really I was into the darker work a little bit. So I really like Goosebumps, R.L. Stein. I enjoyed Lemony Snicket's books, like A Series of Unfortunate Events, like just the works from my childhood that kind of instilled a love of reading and kind of inspired me to also write something a little spooky, but also a little heartfelt, and a little tough. So there's so many more, but I'll leave it there.
That kind of ties into this next question. How would you say your childhood contributed to your writing style?
There was a lot of my childhood that so a tradition in my family was oral storytelling. So especially with my grandparents, there were a lot of moments that I remember when we'd all just kind of sit around each other and we just listen to stories. And they'd be ghost stories, they'd be happy stories, they'd be religious stories, they'd be cultural, they'd be superstitions, they'd be about things that went bump in the night, and usually tales to like get kids to like behave, like you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And family was always huge in my life, and anytime that we could get together, we did, and we just loved talking with one another. Even when I was really little and couldn't contribute to the conversation, I love to listen. And I think listening to those stories really did impact me as a writer in the way that I approach story, frame a story, talk about stories. My parents and my grandparents' primary language was Farsi. And even the turns of phrase, how you start a story, is different from English. And I think translating the Persian phrases into English, I think had a big impact in how I approach writing a story too. So
What do you enjoy reading the most?
everything. Everything that's a little bit magical, a little bit spooky, and a little bit wondrous, I think is what I enjoy reading the most. So anything that feels like I open the door and I turn the corner and there's an adventure waiting for me, I think is always going to be like my ultimate story.
Who is your greatest inspiration and how have they impacted your life?
I feel like it's going to be cheesy because maybe a lot of people say this, but I think my grandparents are my biggest inspiration. Just knowing about their stories and like picking up in leaving your country to move into another country that you don't know
Mm.
the language. You have so many kids, you have a huge family, you don't know like what the future is going to hold, but you have faith that it'll turn out okay. And then to come to America and build such a great life and kind of give opportunities that didn't exist to me and
Mm.
the generations that are now born here is always going to inspire me. It's always going to be the thing that motivates me to want to be better because it's kind of like I want their legacy to mean something. And by me writing stories, it's like a representation of them.
So before we end, I have some rapid fire questions to ask you. The first question is, what is your favorite color?
Blue.
When are you the happiest?
The morning after my coffee.
Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
It gets better.
If you could have three people, dead or alive, for dinner guests, who would they be?
Okay, I'll say Sabati here, Tahre Mafi. And let's say Rick Riordan. They're all alive. So it's fine.
um, what is the song that you have on repeat currently?
Oh God. Song on repeat currently. It's gonna be the Kingdom Hearts soundtrack.
What is your favorite movie?
My favorite movie, Spirited Away.
Oh, I love that movie.
Yeah, nothing beats it.
Yeah. What is a book that you have read recently or are currently reading that you would recommend?
A book I read a few months ago, We Deserve Monuments by Jess Hammonds. I really recommend it. It's similar to my book. It has, a family mystery, complicated family history. It has a very significant grandparent story in there as well. And it has a really beautiful romance. So that's what I recommend.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah,
once again, I want to thank you so much. We learned a lot about you. Thank you for taking your time out of your day to sit down and talk. Can you let everyone at home know about any upcoming projects and where they can connect with you?
sure. My next work is Going Younger. I have a middle grade contemporary fantasy series titled Farrah Noorzad and the Ring of Fate, which follows 12-year-old Farrah, who discovers her distant father is a Jinn King after a wish upon a ring gone wrong, and how she has to go essentially save him after making her wish. And that will come out next year in the summer. And if you want to have updates on me and my books, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at Deeba Zargarpur.
Awesome. Yay. Thank you so much again. I
Thanks for
truly
having me.
appreciate having you. Yeah, thank you. Did you enjoy this episode? I'm sure you did. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at MyGlendaleLAC and follow us on Spotify and Apple or anywhere where you get your podcast from at Teen Gen Talks. Also, make sure to give us a like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Glendale Library Arts and Culture, where we post the full video episodes every Friday at 4:30 p.m.